So Parshas Vaera, it's a beautiful parsha. It's the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning, whichever way you want to look at it, of the slavery and the Exodus. Say it's the beginning of the end because it was the beginning of the end of the Egyptians as they started to experience the first 7 of the 10 plagues, and the vibe was becoming very much that the Jews would become free. A little bit like what Iran maybe is feeling at the moment. Obviously, they're suffering terribly in the process, but there's a sense that maybe they'll be free and able to remove the yoke of persecution. And the Jews were feeling that, so it was that way. It was the beginning of the end. It was also the end of the beginning, because the beginning of the Jewish people of being able to become a nation where they would now be able to be responsible, be able to be connected to Hashem, be able to have a mission, be able to go to the land. And it was the end of the beginning of their stage of being really just a formative baby, so to speak, as a nation without any responsibilities, without a mission, without really a purpose. And now they would be given that real start. So Vaera is the moment when Moses is realizing that his first encounter with the Jews isn't really the way he was hoping it would be. Yes, they were very excited when he came, and Aaron was very excited when Moses came and said, "We're going out." Do you know why they were so excited? Besides for the fact that they were going to be freed soon based on this promise, is because he used the code word that they were waiting for. The elders knew that when someone would show up and say, "Pakod pakadati," Hashem has remembered you, they would use that exact word. That was what Joseph told them before he died. There's going to be somebody who comes and says, "Pakod pakadati." God has remembered you. And only a few of the elders knew this secret. It wasn't known amongst the masses. And so when Moshe came along and said, "God told me, Pakod pakadati, I will surely remember you," the elders were there and said, "That's the code. This is it. He's the Mashiach. He's the one that's going to take us out." And they all started dancing, and word spread around the entire Jewish people that it's happening. And they all danced and they all prostrated themselves until Pharaoh, at the end of last week's portion, made life more difficult for them and said, "You think you're going free? What are you got another thing coming? I'm going to make life even harder for you. Previously, you didn't have to make the cement. You didn't have to make the mortar. Now you're going to have to make the mortar with the straw and all the things that you have to get for yourself now." And the Jewish people, obviously, got a little bit bothered by this. And so when Moshe saw that Hashem wasn't giving them the redemption right away, Moshe backs up and he says, "Hashem, you put me in this position to be the leader of the Jews. I'm not here to tell them why they're suffering. I'm here to tell you enough of their suffering." And he said to Hashem, "Lama hare'osa la'am hazeh," why are you doing evil to this people? And he became the advocate for the Jews. And that's exactly what God wanted him to be. God does not want rabbis and leaders to be lawyers for God, to explain why they're going through suffering, why they're having these challenges. He wants us to demand better on behalf of the people to Hashem, to be the frontline spokesperson for the people. And that's what Moshe did. And so now Hashem appears to Moshe and he says the following. God revealed himself to Moshe. Vaera, some say the translation is a rebuke, a form of rebuke. And he says, "I am God. I appeared to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And Ushmi Hashem lo nadati lahem." They never got to know the real me. You're going to get to know the real me. V'gam hakimosi es brisi, but I made a promise to them. Laseis lahem es eretz Canaan, eretz mugarahem asher garu ba, that I will take them, that I will take you and your descendants, their descendants, out of slavery and bring you to freedom. So Hashem guarantees Moshe Rabbeinu that, don't worry, I made a vow, I made a promise. It might look bad at the moment, but I want you to have the faith and instill in them the faith that it is going to happen. So it's an interesting question, because if you look at the third verse of the portion, which is actually verse number 4, the Hebrew says, V'gam hakimoisi es brisi itam. So I've also remembered the promise that I made. And then the next verse says, V'gam, and also ani shamaiti, I have heard, nakas b'nei Yisrael, the cries and the moans of the Jewish people. So we have a question on that verse. What does it mean? Who's God saying, and also? I also heard the groans and the moans. Who else was hearing the groans and the moans? And then, are you only going to remember your covenant because you heard the groans and the moans? Meaning, if they wouldn't have screamed and cried, you wouldn't have remembered the covenant that you were supposed to take them out of Egypt? It's the question we have on God's statement, Hashem's statement to Moshe. The translation of, I too have heard the moans, and therefore I am going to take them out of slavery. So those are two questions we have, are very obvious questions on the fact that Hashem is telling this to Moshe. Who else is hearing the moans if not God? And the second thing, why is now Hashem taking them out of Egypt? Only because of those complaints. Meaning, had they not complained so much, he wouldn't have listened to them. He wouldn't have remembered the promise. If a time of a promise is a promise, even if they're accepting it. By the way, with us, we sometimes have faced this challenge. Do we think that the only way Mashiach is going to come is if we scream and cry and say, Hashem's enough's enough? Shouldn't Hashem bring Mashiach because he promised us a redemption that's going to be a better world for us? Even if we seem to be somewhat satisfied with the status quo, shouldn't he still say, time's up, we reached the time, why do we have to scream and yell? So here it seems to imply that because they screamed and because they moaned, Hashem said, now I'm going to remember the promise. So in order to understand this verse, and in general, suffering of Jewish people and how it should be approached, we have to dig into a little bit of an interesting interpretation that's given by Shimshon Ostropoler. Shimshon Ostropoler was a 16th century Kabbalist in Poland, and he was a great Kabbalist, one of the great teachers of his generation. Unfortunately, he died and was killed in a terrible, terrible situation where he, amongst all the Jews in Nemirov, certainly more comfortable over there, he was in Nemirov, and they came in 1648, Khmelnytsky and the Cossacks, and they massacred him and all of the people of that town, amongst which 300,000 Jews were killed. We think of the Cossacks being like a wild people. You know, they had great horses, but the Cossacks are one of the biggest butchers of Jews in history, in entire world history. And when we talk about 300,000, it sounds like less than 6 million that the Nazis killed, but 300,000 with the sword, because that's all they had. We're talking about rivers of blood through these towns and through these Jewish villages. 1648, 1649 were the years that this happened. Entire towns were massacred. And it was Bogdan Khmelnytsky. Is he a bit of a hero? He's a bit of a hero. He's a hero in Ukraine, right? Not so much for the Jews. So he was unfortunately massacred in that terrible tragedy. But in his teachings, which are very profound, beautiful teachings, he shares a debate from the Talmud between two great rabbis, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Now, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are two rabbis who always were arguing with each other, as was the case with many of the partners and pairs of the Talmud, Abaya and Rava, Rav and Shmuel. We know more famous ones, Hillel and Shammai. And there were many others that were contemporaries of each other, but they would always just be arguing back and forth different viewpoints. They never, God forbid, hated each other. They actually had tremendous love and respect for each other. Just to give you an idea, when Reish Lakish passed away before Rabbi Yochanan was going crazy, because he said, who am I going to have in my space that can argue with me and can debate me and can give me a different opinion? So they sent him a study partner who was just there the whole time to say, yeah, Rabbi Yochanan, whatever you're saying, that's right, that's true, that's true. Oh, you're so smart. You're such a clever person. And he said, get him out of here. I don't need that. I don't want that. I miss Reish Lakish. And it said he actually went crazy, a little bit crazy, because he just didn't have the person like Reish Lakish who he could feed off with that resistance. Don't ever think that the best friend you have is the guy who agrees with everything you say. It's not what's best for you. What's best for you is ultimately the one who's pushing you to think differently, to go outside of your comfort zone. Right? That was Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Now, just so you can know the full story, because it's a great story. And I'm sure you know because I've shared it before. I shared it actually once at a high holidays many years ago. Reish Lakish was a gladiator. He was a gladiator in the Roman Colosseums. And he was known as a brute of a man. He was extremely strong and very violent. One day, he sees what looks like a pretty woman swimming in the lake below from the ravine where he was. And as he was a gladiator, he wanted to have his way immediately with this woman. So he dives off the cliff face, he dives into the water, he starts swimming towards this beautiful person. Turns out it wasn't a woman, it was Rabbi Yochanan. He was a very handsome man. He actually didn't have a beard. It didn't grow in, but he had very nice features, beautiful features. And from a distance, looked like maybe he was a female. Then he got closer. He's like, "Oh, okay, sorry about that, buddy." And he says, Rabbi Yochanan says to Reish Lakish, "Wow, such strength you have, though. Such strength. I see the way you jumped off the cliff and you landed in the water and you swam towards me. Chelach li oraisa. If you would use your strength for Torah, there'd be no stopping you." So he says, back to Rabbi Yochanan, Shufreich lenashe. Such beauty I haven't seen. You can get any woman that you want with your handsome features. Meaning to say, such beauty you should use for women whenever you can. And he says, you think I'm beautiful? You should see my sister. She's really beautiful. And if you turn around your life and become a Baal Teshuvah and start keeping the mitzvahs and following Torah, I will give you my sister to marry as a wife. There's a lot of questions on this story, but the biggest answer to all of those questions is when you let somebody know that you believe in them, which is what Rabbi Yochanan did to Reish Lakish, the first thing he said, which changed his world, it actually shattered his world, was, I believe in you so much. I believe that if you used your strength in the right ways and channeled it to Torah, that you would be so great, I would even put my sister as a prospect for you. That's how much I believe in you. If you can believe in somebody to that level that you would put something so close to your heart as a literal collateral to that person, because obviously his sister would have had a say in the matter. She would have said whether she wanted to. But once he became the great Reish Lakish, who was literally becomes his contemporary in Torah study, that's quoted more times in the Yerushalmi Talmud than any other rabbi. More times are they quoted Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish than any other rabbi in any of the debates through the Jerusalem Talmud. That kind of faith that's instilled in you, you don't let go. And when he heard that, you don't just believe in me that my strength is strong, but you believe in me so much that you'll give me a sister, you know what? I'll turn it around. And he did. And he became the great Reish Lakish, who was his study partner, and it became this basis of one of many different arguments and discussions that they had. Obviously, he never was a gladiator ever again. He still kept his name, but he became a great Torah scholar. Many stories, by the way, throughout the Talmud of people who turned their lives around in similar manner. And when people are serious in life, they can do serious things. When you don't care about things, that's why the Rebbe said, I always liked an atheist better than agnostic. Because an atheist believes in something strongly, and if he would just channel that belief in something strongly, he would be able to turn it around to become a strong believer in Torah. But the guy who doesn't care, doesn't mean anything to me, he'll always say, I don't care. He'll never stay strong about anything. He'll just vacillate. His whole life he'll vacillate. So love the atheist, love the gladiator, love the strength when you see somebody acting in that way, because you know if they channeled it in the right way, there's no stopping them. Back to the argument in this case. There's some beautiful arguments, by the way, Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. I'm not going to get into all of them today, just this one. The argument was, By the way, they both had tough lives. Rabbi Yochanan's life was really challenging. Rabbi Yochanan's life, he lost his father before he was born. His mother died when he was an infant, and he became an orphan. He was raised by family members, uncles, aunts, similar to the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov, though, had his parents alive a little bit longer, enough for them to give him messages that he remembered. He remembered his father's messages before he died. About Avos Yisrael, never forget. But in this case, he lost both his parents extremely young. And then when he married, he also lost his wife. Not only that, he had 10 children. All of his 10 children died in his lifetime while he lived. So if there's anyone who can talk to us about pain, it's Rabbi Yochanan. He understood pain, he experienced pain, he felt it, and it maybe put him on another level above what most normal people live. So he speaks about the idea of growing from pain. He speaks about how when God gives us a challenge, he gives us also a strength that comes along with it. And it's a strength that allows us to overcome not just the challenge, but to bring us to a higher point in our lives than we ever would have been before that challenge came about. And he says, how do I know this? He gives a question of how he knows this is the actual Torah view. He said, because in the case where there's a person who owns a servant, someone is a servant for somebody because they choose that. Let's say they either can't afford their own home, they can't afford their own life, or they stole from him and they can't afford to pay back. So they have to work off the fine, they have to work off the fee, or they actually just work for them so that they have parnasa, they have life. Call it a live-in today. They clean it up a bit. They say it's a live-in help. But really, that's what the servants of old were. You paid them, you took care of them, and the only difference was a servant couldn't leave whenever they wanted. Live-in technically could leave whenever they want. But it was the same idea. So the Torah says that if, while you have one of these servants working for you, you knock out a tooth or you do injury to them because you got angry, punched them, threw something at them, then they immediately go free. Immediately, they are released from your sort of ownership and they become a complete free person. Even if they haven't used up all the time yet that they owe you for what they have to work for you, because they haven't paid off what they stole, immediate freedom. And he says, if that's the case with man, that they suffer pain and injury, they immediately go free, which means they immediately earn a higher status in their existence, in their life, then so too with Hashem. If he causes us to have some pain and some challenge, then he immediately sets us free to be able to go to a higher level and experiencing beyond what our soul was able to be limited to before the pain. It transcends outside of those limitations. So he says, I'm proving it from the Torah, that a person who goes through challenge and pain from God is going to end up not only being ascending to a higher space, their soul will be set free, and they'll be able to achieve things they never realized they could achieve before. Reish Lakish comes along, and he says, I'm going to have a different source for it. And he says, my source for it is actually when it says the word bris. When it says the word bris, it says that there's 2 times it uses the word bris. Once in circumcision, and once where it says bris melach, where it says there's a covenant which is made with salt. And so it says that just like the covenant of a bris, which causes pain to the child, is connected to the covenant which is also made through salt, which is mentioned in another place, bris melach. What does salt do? Salt cleanses out the blood. When you put it on meat, cleanses out all the blood, drains out all the blood. So too, when someone is suffering, from the word bris, baby suffers, connects to the idea of salt, that it cleanses out all their negativity, all of their wrongdoing, all of their impurities, and they become a non-contaminated, very high-functioning, much more ascended individual through the fact that all negativity, All things unkosher have been taken out of them, which is, by the way, two paths we can get to becoming a tzaddik, to Gan Eden. One path is by becoming an actual tzaddik, by keeping every mitzvah, not doing any sin. And the other way is by suffering a lot. And if we go through a lot of pain, we ascend to the same place. And that's why it's actually, you saw the soldiers who came, who were injured. These were called the disabled soldiers. In Hebrew, I forgot what the word is that they used for it, that they were disabled soldiers. They came to New York to get a blessing from the Rebbe many years ago. And the Rebbe said, you're not going to be called disabled soldiers. You're going to be called excelling soldiers. Mitzuyane chayal. Why? Because you got this experience. What you suffered was through the worst pain that you experienced on behalf of saving the Jewish people. You know what kind of a level you're on now? The high priest, when he would come out of the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, he still had his eyesight. He could still walk. But you came out of battle and you lost your eyesight. You can't walk. You're on a higher, holier level. So Reish Lakish said, no matter what you're going through, that pain cleanses you and elevates you to a higher place, just like bris and salt are connected in that same allegory. Now, it seems like they're both saying the same thing. It seems like Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are both saying the same thing, right? They're both saying that if you go through pain, it elevates you. But they're not, because they have to be arguing, because they always did. So what are they arguing about? What are they arguing about? What is the difference between Rabbi Yochanan's proof of a guy who gets his teeth knocked out by the boss, and the guy who is now experiencing the bris kind of cleansing, which is commensurate with salt? What's the difference between those two examples to prove that you are free, you are elevated, you are cleansed through pain? Seems to be the same proof. There is a difference. And if you understand Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, you know that the difference is very significant. Because otherwise they wouldn't have argued, they wouldn't have mentioned a different proof. And the difference is that according to Rabbi Yochanan, if it, let's say, happened that the guy was playing outside and he tripped and fell and his tooth fell out, he doesn't go free. He only goes free if it was the master, if it was the boss that was the cause of it. If it happened inadvertently, unintentionally, he doesn't go free. But with the salt, it doesn't matter when you're putting salt on an animal to take the blood out. It doesn't matter if you know what you're doing, if you don't know what you're doing. If you have intention, you don't have intention. It's cleansed and the blood comes out. So what Reish Lakish is saying and what Rabbi Yochanan is saying is very different. Rabbi Yochanan is saying that you will become holier and you will be cleansed and you will be free if you recognize that it's coming from Hashem, that He's causing you the pain. If you realize that it's coming from Hashem, then you will lift yourself to that higher place because you will close your eyes and say, Hashem is doing this to me because He wants to bring me to a better space and accomplish bigger things and transcend my current experience. But it's only if you know it's coming from the boss. If it's by accident, you just trip and fall and you think, oh, why did I hurt my knee? That was an annoying trip. And you start blaming the rock. You're not going to be cleansed from that. You're not going to be elevated from that.
Or by blaming another person. Leaving the other person.
Correct. Or say, this guy did it to me.
It's that person's fault.
Right.
Where you don't own it as if Hashem sent this messenger to you to see how you're going to wear in that circumstance. That has caused you pain.
Says Rabbi Yochanan, you're not going up in that situation. Correct. Rabbi Yochanan says, unless you acknowledge where it's coming from, you will not change. You will not grow. Says Reish Lakish, my dear brother-in-law, I think that you're missing out on something because you grew up religious. I think that you're missing out on something. When someone goes through pain and suffering, they are cleansed and they are elevated and they are refined, whether they realize it's coming from God or not. Because the fact of the matter is, Hashem is still controlling it. Even if they don't realize where it's coming from, Hashem is still in charge of that action. And He's doing it to lift that person to a place that he wouldn't have gotten to otherwise. So you might not realize it's coming from the source, but blood is being taken out regardless. What is Reish Lakish saying? That when Hashem comes along and he says, V'gam ani shamaiti, I too have heard the complaints. They weren't complaining to Hashem. They weren't saying that it was because Hashem. They were saying it was because of the Egyptians. They were blaming the taskmasters and the Mitzrim. They were saying it's their fault. So Hashem says, V'gam ani shamaiti. But I have also heard these complaints, and it doesn't matter that they were blaming them. I agree with Reish Lakish. I agree that as long as they were suffering and in pain, they deserve to be elevated and freed. They have cleansed all the different challenges and impurities that might have still been residually there, and they're ready to go out free. So here we see from this verse, and that's also why he says, because I heard the crying and the complaining, because I recognized the pain, and even though they weren't directing it at my feet, I still was able to accept that they deserve better and accept that they have achieved a higher state of being through what they have gone through. At the end of the day, it's the blessing we never ask for. The blessing we never ask for is the previous Rebbe who ended up in jail for almost lost his life for the time that he was doing counter-revolutionary activities in 1917 when the Russians took over, the communists took over Russia. And he went and still kept opening mikvahs and opening schools and doing it. And they eventually arrested him and said he was sentenced to die. And they put a gun to his head. And he said the famous line, "That toy doesn't scare me." He said, that toy doesn't scare me when they pointed a gun. And he said, why doesn't the toy scare you? It scares many other people and makes them talk. It's not me. It scares people that have one world and many gods. But I have one God and many worlds. It doesn't scare me. So they realize he's not an ordinary guy. But be that as it may, he almost died as a result of what he was doing. So he was in jail in a terrible persecution. When he came out of jail, miraculously freed, he said, if you would offer me all the money in the world to go through what I just went through, I would never have taken that money. But if you would offer me all the money in the world to take away the experience that I just experienced, I would never take the money either. Because it was priceless what I went through. I never would have taken it for any money in the world. But once I had it, once I experienced it, I never would give it up. And there are people who go through tragedies and they say very similar things. I would give anything. I would give up anything to have my child back, to have my loved one back. But if you want to take away from me the experience that I've gone through in my life since then, of growth and refinement and accomplishment and change and achieving real impact on the world around me through the fact that I went through that I would never give up. Because that created in me a strength that I never knew I had. And so this is what Hashem is saying to Moshe Rabbeinu now. V'gam ani shamaiti. I've heard their complaints just because they've gone through it, not because they're directing at me, because of everything they've suffered. And so, indeed, when Moshe goes over to tell them that it's time to leave, a second time, you take a look at verse number 9 at the bottom of the page. He repeats everything that Hashem just told him. And he says, Moshe relayed God's message via Aaron to the Israelites, but they did not listen to Moshe because of their anguished spirit and because of their harsh labor. So they didn't listen. They said, you know what, Moshe? We heard this before already. Didn't work out. Didn't seem to make life better for us. If anything, it made life worse. So you got to go. We can't listen to you. So lo shamu Moshe, they didn't listen to Moshe mikoitzer ruach u'me'avoda kasha. Now the question is, what was the real cause for why they didn't listen to Moshe? Was it just because it didn't happen right away? So it's actually more than that. The idea of lo shamu Moshe, they didn't listen to Moshe, is because Moshe now is telling them that you need to actually step up and do something. You can't just be freed in the state of being that you are at the moment. Avoda kasha. It was hard work for them to suddenly turn around and believe in God and believe that God was going to take them out miraculously. They thought there would just be an easy path out. But Hashem was actually showing them that, I'm sorry, you're going to have to believe in me and change your mindset in order to become free. When people ask why the miracles of the plagues happened, so there's people who say they had to punish the Egyptians. That's why the plagues happened. Not the case. If you wanted to punish the Egyptians, you could have punished them in one big plague, caused them to have big demise immediately.
Is this where Amunah comes in? Is this where the understanding of Amunah is drawn down?
They needed to build up faith in God. And it had to come through a process of understanding that God was with them, that God was going to be their salvation. And that's why it says, Avoda Kasha was hard work. It wasn't hard work that they were enslaved in Egypt and being persecuted by the Egyptians. That was obvious. That was going on for 200 years, for a long time. The hard work was Moshe didn't just walk out the door with them. He wanted them to actually change their mindset, to actually have a different belief. And when they weren't changing, it wasn't happening right away, they were like, oh, so forget it. It's not happening. And what did Hashem want them to change the mindset? That God is actually on their side and he will be there for them. And every one of the plagues was another step in the process of them realizing that Hashem was on their side. So the plagues wasn't so much a punishment to the Egyptians as much as it was education to the Jews. When you watch and see your enemies being destroyed, it's not that they need the punishment. It's that you needed to see that Hashem is on your side. That Hashem is going to break nature to show you that he loves you, to show you that he cares about you. And so after just the blood, okay, it's nice. Could have been a natural event, could have been a natural occurrence, could have been red algae. There's red algae in the Atlantic. It could have been a lot of explanations. It worked out. The Egyptians suffered, and we actually had water. Because as the plagues go on in the Parshas, you'll see what happens. Whatever affected the Egyptians did not affect the Jews. They had clean, crisp, clear water, while the Egyptians had blood. The only time the Egyptians could have water is if they paid the Jews for their water. If they paid for it, they got water. If they stole it, it turned to blood. So it was a real miracle. So the Jews were like, okay, this is good, but there's got to be an explanation for this. It was avoda kasha. It was hard work for them to change their mindset and suddenly start believing in a God that had abandoned them for many years, at least seemingly. And so after the frogs, one more level of belief, one more level of faith kicked in. Okay, maybe Hashem's got my back after all. But nah, still need more proof. As they went through each step, they built their faith to the degree that it was unrecognizable by the time they were ready to leave. How do we know? Because right here they say, V'lo shamu el Moshe. We're not listening to Moses and all his big talk because we have too much work to do to still have faith in God. In the next week's Torah portion, it didn't happen next week. It happened a few months later. Moshe comes to them and says, take the Egyptian god, which is the sheep. One of their gods was the sheep. In front of the Egyptians, tie it to your bedpost, and in 3 days, you're going to slaughter it and swipe the blood, smear the blood on the doorposts of your homes so that Hashem will know that pass over your home and only smite the Egyptian firstborn and not firstborn of the Jews. And they listened without hesitation. That wasn't just coming out of nowhere. That was a built faith that we're going to defy the ones who persecuted us. Remember in the last week's portion, the guy just wanted to be with his wife and didn't want this Egyptian to have his way with her, and he gets beaten to a pulp and he can't stand up for himself because they'd been beaten to submission. They had no courage. And what happened over the course of the 10 plagues? They had built their courage and faith in God, that if God is commanding us to do this, even if it means defying the Egyptians and taking their gods, which is the most shocking act of resistance we could possibly show, that we don't care about their opinions anymore. And they did it without question. So it worked. 10 plagues of education built up their faith. Be able to say, if this is what Moshe is telling us to do, we're going to do it. And because it's coming from Hashem. And we have the faith in Hashem now. So people ask, why did all these plagues have to happen to the Egyptians? It's for us to notice, for us to recognize, for us to grow from, for us to experience. What we see in the world, those who are against the Jews will get their punishments. They'll get their punishments. And we know that because history has shown us that. Not one single anti-Semite has survived to tell the tale. Not one. It's coming. It's coming. There's a Roadrunner reference.
No, the beepers.
Oh, the beepers, yeah.
That's still, I know we don't talk about it, but that still is beyond those beepers were sitting dormant until the time, whatever Hashem said, that person pushed that button and made them blow up in their face.
Yeah.
It's beyond what happened. And you're right.
And even like, okay, obviously the Holocaust was the worst tragedy we've ever experienced. But if you look at the Nuremberg trials and what happened at the Nuremberg trials, when they ended up hanging, those who they found guilty, and they looked at the day that they hanged them was actually on Purim, and not only that, in the Megillah, if you go to the Aseres B'nai Haman, it's amazing. First letter of every one of the 10 sons of Haman, it's the first letter of everyone who was killed. Actually spells out the year as well, the year of when it happened. So whether or not, we can have the tinus or the feelings of abandonment at certain times of exile, but every anti-Semite knows that their fate is sealed, which makes anti-Semites so dumb. Because none of them have actually made it. None of them have actually said, we won against the Jews and we survived long term. Yeah, they last for a few years maybe, but the end is the end. And so the reality is that it's not about them. It's not about them coming and them going. It's about us realizing that Hashem is doing it to share that He is protecting us and loving us, because that is the covenant that He made. Even if we didn't deserve it, because we didn't ask Him directly to save us. We didn't think it was Him. We thought it was, the Hamas people who we have to protect ourselves against, and they're the ones who caused it. And maybe it was, we have to know, it was all Hashem, coming from Hashem, and we say, why are you causing the suffering? Crying out to you to help me. You're the boss. You threw this. So that's the first passage of this week's Torah portion, the recognition that the Jews were still lacking faith, Moshe defending them, but then being told, Moshe, you don't have to defend them so much. I'm going to have their back. I'm taking them out regardless. And then we get to the story of the actual plagues themselves. So sorry, let me just get the air down a little bit. Feeling a little warm. Sure.
You mentioned that Joseph sent that passport.
Yeah.
So Joseph knew they were going to be slaves?
Yeah. Everyone knew.
Why didn't anyone try to go out? Like today, do we need to go to Israel now and get everything? Just be in Israel?
If we were told by some prophet, that we're going to go through a tough time in America in the future, how many of us would pick up and leave right away? Not
you told me, I guess.
Not now, Alan. Like in 50 years, maybe your grandkids. You would probably tell your grandkids, maybe you should be thinking about going elsewhere. But remember, it's not like they had a full carte blanche in Israel. They would have had to go back and would have had to start all over again and had to, create their own cities and their own thing. It's not like they would have been welcomed in by anybody. So, yes, they had opportunities to go back. They had. And they knew this was coming because it was actually promised to Abraham already. But there was maybe a little opening that they thought maybe we could evade it. Maybe we could defer the challenge of the slavery, because it was supposed to be 400 years. And because of Avraham and Yitzchak's merit, it went down to 210 years. And then because of Yosef's merit, it went down to 86 years. So they were hoping that maybe it could be postponed, deferred, canceled. And they were in Egypt, and they were like, things are good. So
Was anybody in Israel at the time when they brought back Jacob to be buried?
they all came back with them because life was good in Egypt. They had a good setup. But yeah, looking at it in hindsight, we would say, come on, you saw the writing on the wall. But tell me one time in history we saw the writing on the wall and we acted on it. How many times, whether it was in Germany, I mean, you had your handful of people that left, but majority, Poland, Germany, Inquisition, Spain, it's like, it's not going to happen. The world's going to stand up. Someone's going to stop it. Hashem's going to have mercy. Yeah, there's an edict. We know there's an edict that's coming, but surely it's not going to be that bad. We never think it's going to be that bad. Right now, we don't think it's that bad. Right now, we think it's all good. It's okay. Well, we're one president away from the whole thing being turned upside down. You know, what if someone comes in and takes leadership of the United States that suddenly is on the, probably is like Mamdani? You know, we're all of a sudden, we're like completely at their disposal. No protection of shuls, no protect Jewish schools. All of a sudden, we have no prosecution of anyone who's doing anti-Semitic acts. It's not a big deal. And all of a sudden, you have the climate. That's all you need is the climate. I'm not saying it's there yet. I'm not saying we're in that position, nor am I saying, should we run away? But these things happen throughout history, and we just somehow stay a little blind to it because we're focusing on where we are and what we're doing and what we're accomplishing. We're all accomplishing good things. So it's very hard to say that about the Jews in Egypt. They were really in a good spot. They really had a really good position. They knew Joseph was the leader. I mean, come on, he's like a big macher. We had our prime minister. We had our viceroy. Not gonna turn on us, even though we thought that may be a prophecy. But once it happened, they knew that it was going to end. They just didn't know when, and they didn't know who.
For some reason, the Levites said, no.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not playing Stockholm Syndrome in these cases. I'm seeing the writing on the wall somehow, some way. And I can't even imagine that, being in an environment where everyone is following the crazy, go down this path sheeple people we turned into, except one sect. And why, and I don't know where the answer is, or it's even ever been a question, why didn't other people see the Levites living this way, normal and free? Why wasn't that the mass? Because there was some leaders that were there that said, I'm not playing this stuff.
Yeah. It's hard to know. Did Levites have a different area where they lived? Was it a different, they were always considered to be a different class of society because they just weren't workers, they were learners, they were shepherds. Maybe they just had a different, it seemed like everyone else wanted to get involved in the Cairo business district. All the Jews wanted to be part of the success of Egypt. They wanted to be a big macher in like following in Joseph's footsteps. And Levi was like, we're out. We sit and meditate to God, we study. So they weren't in that world. They just weren't in that world. It's not like they deliberately stood up on the street corners and said, guys, don't fall for this. Just, they were out of the equation, a little bit out of the equation. But having said that, there was still ample opportunity, as there always is, to avoid. And it could have been spiritual and it could have been physical. Meaning to say, when Hashem said, I'm going to destroy the Beit HaMikdash, and he told that to Prophet Isaiah, he gave multiple opportunities for them to change his mind and for them to change the edict. And unfortunately, they didn't do it. And so there'll always be warnings. There'll always be writing on the wall before it ends up coming to fruition. So on the bottom of page 357, in our remaining 10 minutes, I'll share with you a beautiful thought. Got a bit heavy before with faith and dealing with pain. But there's a beautiful idea here with regards to Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron when it came to implementing the plagues. So in verse 14, God told Moses and Aaron to announce the first plague. He said to Moses, with Pharaoh being obstinate and hard-hearted, he refuses to send the people forth. You already asked him to, and he didn't listen. So now go to Pharaoh in the morning, for that is when he goes out to the water to relieve himself privately, so he can pretend to be a god the rest of the day. Pharaoh would only go to the bathroom one time a day. He'd go at dawn before anybody else woke up. He went to the Nile River, and he had his number 1 and number 2 that he went over there. And the rest of the day, he didn't go to the bathroom. He told people, I'm a god. I never need to relieve myself. And they believed him. He made himself into a little god. And the interesting thing is, the reason why he would do this at the Nile is because Jacob actually blessed him. Jacob gave him a blessing that the Nile River will always rise to you when you go there. It was a blessing of Jacob to Pharaoh because he was good to the Jews in the beginning. And maybe it was his father, maybe it was another Pharaoh, but he gave him this blessing. So every time Pharaoh would go to the Nile, the waters would rise up to him, and he was able to relieve himself with discretion. So that's what he did. So he went and met him there because he knew that that's where he would be. It would also embarrass him a little bit. It's like, go catch him while he's like trying to trick everybody that he's not a god. And say, excuse me, Mr. God, what are you doing? And he's in the bathroom state. And go over to him and tell him, station yourself opposite him on the bank of the Nile River, and take in your hand the staff that was turned into a snake. That was the show. That was the sign that God told him to do in the beginning. And through this, and then he says, sorry, it's still on page 356 at the bottom. You must say to him, God of the Hebrews has sent me. Say, send forth my people, they may serve me in the wilderness. Until now you have not paid attention to my command. But now this is what God has said. Through this you will recognize that I am Hashem. I am going to strike the water of the staff of my hand, and will turn to blood, and the fish of the river will die. So in verse 19, after that whole speech, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, and God said to Moshe, Emar el Aharon, now go say to Aaron, Kach matcha unetei yadcha me'mei Mitzrayim al nahar Eseim. Go and tell Aaron to hit the water, and it'll turn to blood. All the rivers will turn to blood, not just the Nile, but all the waters will turn to blood. So the question that's asked here, obviously by even Rashi, who's the foremost commentary on the Torah, why did Hashem tell Moshe to tell Aaron to hit the thing? Already Moshe went to Pharaoh and said, I'm going to hit the waters and it's going to turn to blood. Now Hashem says, Moshe, by the way, don't hit it yourself. Tell Aaron to hit it and it'll turn to blood. 80 years before, what happened? Moshe was put into the Nile River. He was floating. And the daughter of Pharaoh found him floating there and saved him. So not only, like we explained last week, did Moshe owe his life to the daughter of Pharaoh and lived with that memory his entire life by the fact that his name was not what his parents called him. His name was not Yeser Tuvia, all those other names. His name was Moshe, the name which Batya called him to remind him that he was saved only because of her kindness. But even the water that he was floating in the basket, was doing him a favor and it helped save his life. As a result of the favor that the water did, how dare you, says Hashem to Moshe, hit this water now and turn it into blood. Because that would be throwing in stones to a well you drank from, which is completely the opposite of gratitude. And so 80 years later, Moshe's not allowed to hit the water. Now the crazy thing is that water doesn't have feelings. Water is not, not going to be upset at him. I saved your life 80 years ago and now you're hitting me? Water just has to do whatever it's told to do. You pick up water, you drink water, you pick up water, put it in the... It was about Moshe. It was about us. It was about the Torah reminding us to be so careful about showing gratitude to somebody in a situation where even if many, many years later, reason to have forgotten about their kindness. But that one act that they did many years before should be something you always show gratitude towards no matter what. So comes along the plagues, and the next plague, which was frogs, Hashem tells him again, don't hit the Nile to make frogs come out of it. Let Aaron hit the Nile to make frogs come out of it. And then when the next plague of lice came along, Hashem said, don't hit the ground, let Aaron hit the ground, and the lice will come from the ground. Okay, what did the ground do? What are you showing gratitude to the ground for? I understand the Nile. You don't want to hit the Nile because the Nile saved your life when you were floating. But what about the lice? Why can't you hit the ground? If you remember, when he killed the Egyptian, he buried him in the ground. The ground made him that he wasn't known, at least till later. He was able to get enough time to escape. He was able to escape. So as a result of that, the ground also deserved some gratitude. He wasn't allowed to hit the ground. Now contrast this with the big god Pharaoh, who was told by Jacob, this Nile is going to rise to you and is going to come up to you out of honor. And he should have said, wow, thank you, Yaakov, and thank you, Nile. And what does he do to pay back? He pees in it and he poops in it. That's how he pays back favors. So Moshe is not even allowed to hit it because it saved his life. But Pharaoh, who's still getting payment from the Nile every day when he goes there, is saying, I don't care about you. I'm going to treat you in a very disrespectful manner. That's the difference between Moshe and Pharaoh. Now, this is obviously a lesson for us because the Nile doesn't have feelings and the ground doesn't have feelings. So for us, this is a lesson of sensitivity, being able to treat people with a little bit of sensitivity and kindness, and most of all, never forget the debt of gratitude you owe, even if it's somebody who, somebody once said that the guy was doing it anyway. He said, halacha says you're supposed to thank the host who gives you a meal, even if they were making a meal anyway for their family and for whoever they invited. And they invited you last minute. They didn't do anything extra for you. They didn't make any extra food for you. But you benefited from it. So you have to show kindness. You have to show gratitude. And it's very easy to say, I'm going to downplay what that person did. They didn't even mean to do kindness to me. They didn't even mean to show favor. But it's a message for us. There's another custom that when we make Kiddush on Friday night, what do we do? No, that's what we do on Pesach. We do that also, not to rejoice over the pain that was inflicted upon the Egyptians. That's a whole separate thing. But the idea that you cover the challah when you make Kiddush is because challah is such an important food. It is the staple of the meal. Of every meal, bread is the staple of the meal. It's before Atkins diets came around, but that's what it was. And wine, to say the blessing on the wine before is a disrespect to the challah. You're treating the wine as a priority to the bread, which is the staple of the meal. So we say we're going to cover over the challah, so it doesn't see. So we don't want to embarrass the challah. So you cover it over so it doesn't see that you're making a blessing on wine. And then once you finish the wine, you take the cover off the challah. You say, hello, good to see you. Welcome to the meal. We're just starting now, right? The challah doesn't get embarrassed. Challah doesn't get ashamed. What are we doing? We're doing it because we want to train ourselves in sensitivity. That we're never to embarrass somebody, even if there's a chance they might feel offended. They might be embarrassed. Careful with your words. Careful with your actions. It's to train us. And so here too, it's to train us how to be grateful and show gratitude. There was a fellow who was in the Chafetz Chaim's yeshiva in Poland. And he became very wealthy later in life. And he went to a yeshiva that was Chafetz Chaim Yeshiva to give a very big donation. And when he came to the dean of the school to give a big donation, the dean said, you don't look like a Chafetz Chaim guy. You look like a very secular Jew. Explain to me why you're giving a nice donation to our school, to our yeshiva. Didn't even have a yarmulke. And this person said, I'm giving this donation because, I'll tell you a story. I was in the yeshiva of the Chafetz Chaim in Poland. I was a bad kid. I was misbehaving. I was mischievous. I didn't deserve to be in the yeshiva. And you know what? Eventually they had enough of me. They kicked me out. But you can't kick a kid onto the street. So until my parents would come to pick me up and bring me back home, I needed a place to stay. He couldn't have me stay in the yeshiva because I was going to be a bad influence on the other kids. So what happened? The Chafetz Chaim told me to come stay in his house. I went to stay in the Chafetz Chaim's house. He didn't have an extra bed. He lived a very, very simple home. Just to tell you about the Chafetz Chaim, his wife had a store. He wouldn't take money from anybody. But his wife had a store that would sell Judaica, sell different types of things, items. So people, when they wanted to give money to the Chafetz Chaim, would go into the store and spend more money than they otherwise would have to buy an object and say, I wanted it, I needed it. But really, they were just giving it to pay the Chafetz Chaim and give him some kind of money. The Chafetz Chaim realized what was happening. So he told his wife, he said, as soon as you make enough money that you need to for the day, close the store. We're not here to make money. We're not here that people should give extra. You make the money you need and then close the store. Anyway, Chafetz Chaim had a very simple home. He put the kid to sleep on a couch. It was a very cold night, and the fire wasn't warming the whole house the way it should, where it would keep it warm. And the kid was a little bit cold. But the Chafetz Chaim was still studying Torah and learning in his study the whole night. He was studying in his room. Chafetz Chaim had a coat on, and he saw the kid needed a very thin blanket, needed an extra layer. So the Chafetz Chaim took his own coat off. This is a kid who was kicked out of yeshiva. Kid didn't deserve to be in the yeshiva anymore because of his misbehavior. He was only in the house because he hadn't been picked up yet to go home. He took the coat off his own back and he put it over the kid, thinking that the kid was sleeping already, didn't notice what he was doing, didn't even realize it, but he saw he was shivering a little bit, so he put it on to keep him warm, and he sat and studied the rest of the night in just his shirt, obviously freezing cold. He said, the Chafetz Chaim didn't know I was awake. And I have to tell you something. And this is where he got a little emotional when he was telling the story to the dean. He said, I've been through a tough life. I went through a lot of tzaras. I survived the war, but you wouldn't believe what I went through. If I told you the stories, you wouldn't believe it. And I managed to find my way to America. I went through tough life personally. Even when I came to America, it was very difficult in the beginning. But I want to tell you something. Every time I felt cold, every time I felt ready to give up, that coat kept me warm. I was warmed by the feeling of a man who knew nothing about me, should not have cared about me, should not have seen me as an important person because I messed up his yeshiva. But he came over to me when I was sleeping or he thought I wouldn't know, took his own coat off his back to keep a fellow Jew warm. And while I'm not religious myself today, I can tell you that because I've been warmed still by that coat till this very day, I have made enough money that I want to give back to his yeshiva and to his institution. This is the kind of gratitude that we can live with when we think about a person who during our weakest moments, maybe our lowest points, said a kind word to us, gave us an encouragement, lifted us, maybe gave us a warm hug, maybe gave us a coat, gave us a feeling of, you can get through this. And then we became a big macher, then we became a big shot, then we became able to stand on our own 2 feet. And you know, I don't need any help anymore because I can handle myself and my business. Never forget those acts of kindness when you were most vulnerable, because that is what the Torah is teaching us. 80 years later, Moshe, the big leader of the Jews, is going to take them out of Egypt. Don't forget your humble beginnings. When you were vulnerable and fragile as a baby in the Nile, that water kept you afloat. L'chaim, l'chaim.